We appreciate your patience. We are now back from executive session. Nothing to report. We are resuming public session. It is now 8 o'clock. And would everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance, led by Trustee Kavanaugh.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Please be seated. Remind everybody of the emergency exits. Immediately to the rear of the building, to my right and to your left. In the event of an emergency, please exit through, in an orderly fashion, through one of these exits. This is a smoke-free school district. Smoking is not permitted in the building or anywhere on the school grounds. This is also a hate-free and bully-free school district. And again, welcome to the meeting of February 7th. First, we start with the board consent agenda, item number C. Mr. Superintendent?
Thank you, President Felice. The administration recommends the approval of board consent items reflected in Schedule C1.
Okay, board, need a motion. Item C1. Trustee Flippin, seconded by Vice President Hayes. Any questions on the item C1? Seeing no questions, all those in favor? Seeing all hands raised. Are you watching we have two members, Trustee Trent and Trustee Pacini are on remote and are being monitored by the district clerk. So you're monitoring their votes? Okay. You have all trustees present voting in favor. And so therefore, I don't know how the others voted, so I trust that you have them. So the motion carries. Are they on, are they up there?
Yep.
Okay. There we go. And now that brings us to the superintendent's report.
Thank you, President Felice. Very doctor. Thank you. So it's only been a week since our last meeting, so my report is not as lengthy, but just as exciting. We'll get right to it. I always like to begin with just a reminder about our snow closings. I'm not going to go into any details. There is no snow in the forecast, which as a superintendent, I'm very happy about. But again, should there be an instance where we have to delay an opening or close the school, the idea is that we communicate to the community as early as possible so that community members can make the proper arrangements. That is also true for our staff. So stay tuned. But looking at the forecast, it doesn't seem to be snow coming anytime soon. That said, I had the opportunity to visit the snow with our Outdoors Club this past weekend. I joined the Outdoors Club at Butternut Mountain up in Great Barrington, Massachusetts, along with Trustee Barry's daughter who was on the trip. Fantastic time. Our Clippers did well on the slopes. Our board ex officio, Britt Johnson's not here tonight. She's actually competing in a basketball game. And that's a photo of myself and her on a ski lift. And if you think she's a beast on the basketball court, you get to see her with a snowboard. And despite my smiling, that's actually a look of fear on my face. The students wanted me to do a black diamond with them, which I did. I survived it. But I have to say, our students are fantastic. There's a group of students from a parochial school from Long Island, which I'll not name. They left a mess in the lodge, and our kids cleaned it up. And they commented that they didn't have Clipper pride. And so it's really nice when we get accolades from people outside of the community about the composure and just the way our kids are. So it was just a great time just to spend casually with the students and doing something recreational and fun. I encourage more students to participate in these types of clubs or whatever club meets your interest. In terms of literacy, which is a big sort of a endeavor and something we're focusing on certainly now and looking forward as we go through the budget process and next year, we certainly look to promote literacy in creative ways, one of which was our Snuggle Up and Read event, which occurred at Vern W. Kritz Elementary School, where staff members volunteered their time to read to students in their pajamas. They were very comfy. And what I loved about it was the fact that we went back to traditional books. I feel like there's something to be said about reading books as opposed to reading using technology like Kindles or iPads or even Chromebooks. To that end, I'm going to give a preliminary shout out to Dr. Blasek because today I had a great time at the middle school for their World Read Aloud Day, in which various staff members read aloud to kids at different grade levels or each grade level. Our sixth graders, for example, read, and basically it was tied to social studies curriculum. So sixth graders are talking about Egypt in their curriculum. So they got to have the book How the Sphinx Got to the Museum read aloud by Jesse Hartland, which is a fantastic book. Of course, I had to ask the question, how many of you believe that the pyramids were built by aliens? Most of them raised their hands, so I think we're in agreement with that. Our seventh graders read, in conjunction with their learning about the development of government after the Revolutionary War, and actually an introduction to our Generation Citizen sort of presentation, read the book, Kamala and Maya's Big Idea by Mina Harris. It's actually based on a true story in which our current Vice President, Kamala Harris, sort of lobbied for the creation of a playground in our community and how they got that done. So that was a great book to be exposed to. And Dr. Blazek, can I say this is your favorite because of the photographer? And I want to come up. She actually has copies of the books that she'll pass around to the board if you kind of want to peruse them. But for the eighth graders, which are learning about the Great Depression, they got the book, The Photographer Who Found the Faces of the Great Depression by Carol Boston Weatherford, which basically talks about a female photographer back during the Depression who took these iconic photographs that I think all of us have seen. It was a great time just spending some time with the students in their classrooms. As you can see, the teachers were fantastic and their sort of enthusiasm in reading these different books. And I just like the feedback from the students in terms of how they, there was a guided sort of reading instruction that was organized by Dr. Blazek, so thank you again. It was just a great day. Beth Doyle joined me as well to be in classrooms and to sort of commiserate with kids and tell silly stories. I got to tell them about my playground growing up, and we had a slide that only had the ladder, but no slide. And so we used to climb up that ladder and jump from it and get hurt. So one boy said, back in the days, nobody cared about safety. And I was like, I don't know if that's true, but I see what you're getting at. So thank you, Dr. Blazek, and thank you all the PTA members and staff members who made this day possible. I also want to give a big shout out to our counselors. We have a great team of guidance, or school counselors, at each of our buildings. Too many for me to name individually, but this is based National School Counseling Week, so I just wanted to give them a shout out and just a show of appreciation for all the work they do at every grade level. You know, we've expanded our guidance team at the elementary schools, and the rest of the teams are doing a fantastic job, not just supporting students, but prepping them for the future. February is also Black History Month. This is something that we have posted in our high school, which is a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King, which I love. Which the function of education is to teach one to think intensively and to think critically. Intelligence plus character, that is the goal of a true education. And so we try to embody sort of that mindset in some of the programs we offer here at South Country, including community engagement through our Community Resource Network, our Equity Committee, our Restorative Practices, our SEAL Civic Readiness. It really empowers kids to advocate for themselves and be agents of change. And of course, Generation Citizen, which basically is a framework for our civic sort of projects. You know, and of course our AP Capstone projects where kids engage in research and trying to sort of elicit positive change. And I do want to emphasize that Black History Month is about celebrating not just important historical figures, but contemporary figures that have made an impact. And Black history really is American history in all our history. And talking about contemporary people making an impact, I really want to give a shout out to Mr. Romello Green, who is the recipient of the New York State Council for the Social Studies 2024 Susan Wasserman Young Professional Memorial Award, which is awarded to someone who's been in the teaching profession for 5 years or less, who's been impactful, who displays great pedagogy. This year, our very own Romello Green has been a recipient. We'll call him down to a future board member to give him the proper recognition. But we're really proud of him and all of our teachers and staff members who are of African American descent that make an impact in the daily lives of our students. Talking about advocacy, while I was skiing at Butternut, Ms. Segee and a couple of our PTA members from our PTA Council attended a 20th Annual Legislative Workshop. Basically, that's a collection of elected officials in which they address questions that are prepared in advance by different stakeholders, including school administrators, students, parents. Some of the sort of topics discussed were having more accurate metrics for the calculation of federal formulas, including like Title I grants and how Title I grants are awarded to school districts. More information regarding the challenges of transitioning to electric buses in the proposed timeline. I think we can all agree that electric buses are a fantastic idea, but some of the logistics and sort of infrastructure sort of makes it challenging. The reinstatement of the Safe Harmless, and the promise to fully fund foundation aid, which is a topic here on Long Island that's been in the press a lot lately. Long-term plans for state aid considering tax cap limitations, which is a subject of our budget presentation in a bit. More exemptions for tax cap calculations, including capital projects, security measures, mental health, and related training. Basically, the tax cap sometimes limits the ability of school districts to expand their programs. We certainly want to have the state take a look at that. And again, just to sum it up, more aidable salaries for BOCES instructors. A lot of our students attend BOCES programs in which they learn trades, and they don't feel there's enough sufficient aid to support those programs. Changes to our civil service practices. For those who are not familiar, civil service still uses antiquated practices like snail mail. So if we have a position that's vacant, we literally have to rely on a mail, not electronic mail, email, or websites to solicit candidates. And finally, I think the overarching theme was how can we make Long Island more affordable? Aside from that, we do also have a nice philanthropic efforts happening at Brookhaven Elementary School. You may be familiar that the Brookhaven Elementary School has a food pantry. So all month long at our local Stop and Shop, if customers buy a reasonable job, $1 from those proceeds will be donated to our food pantry, which is fantastic. And at this point, I know Dr. Raymond's mom, Victoria, is watching. So I told her I would give her a shout out for those watching at home. Señora, encantado. Ojalá que todo esté bien. Gracias por participar en nuestras juntas públicas. Thank you, that's for Dr. Raymond's mom. But yeah, Dr. Raymond and the whole staff at Brookhaven is doing a fantastic job. What I love most about the food pantry is just the enthusiasm the kids have when they prepare bags of groceries for families in need. So very good. And again, a shout out to Dr. Raymond's mom, as I promised. There is a lot going on in the district, and it's impossible for me to capture it all. As much as we lament some of the pitfalls of social media, please follow our various social media platforms. There's a lot going on, from having folks from the animal shelter visit Frank P. Long, a lot of athletic accolades. In our March meeting, we'll have a summary of our winter sports and the various accolades our student athletes have received. We see some kids engaging in some virtual reality at the middle school. We also see our science Olympiad team who went to compete at Brookhaven Laboratories in a science competition. Certainly a shot from the ski trip. And SpongeBob the Musical. Please check it out. It's this weekend. We have a show Friday night at 7 o'clock. We have a matinee at 2 o'clock. We also have a character brunch for the young learners in our community at, I believe, 12:30. There's a flyer right outside. So take the young kids and meet the characters from the play. But certainly check out the play. It's going to be a lot of fun. So please check out our various media platforms. And you have access to media platforms through our website, which I can't wait for the day is updated. But you can sign on to the community portal, which you'll get email correspondence that's sent out to the district. And this is how you subscribe. We also have a link to all of our social media links. So if you're not familiar with all the various social media platforms that we have in the district, click on that link and it'll give you a list. We also have the Superintendent's Corner that's updated on a monthly basis, which has access to my contact information, my weekly updates, weekly messages, as well as my social media feed. So stay in touch. And that concludes my report. Thank you, Board of Trustees, and to our larger community for everything you do.
Don't leave yet. I just would like to make one comment to Dr. Blazek. The one book that you chose by Jessie Hartland was a really good choice because she not only writes her stories, she illustrates her books as well.
That is correct.
Which is so fantastic. She's such a great artist, and her artwork goes for quite a large sum of money.
It does.
So at $18 a book, you get her fine artwork, as for a nice reasonable cost. But that was a really good choice of a book to use.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay, how many books did you order?
Oh, in order to do this project, I read over 100 books total to choose the correct ones to match our student body and the curriculum. 7th grade was particularly challenging because we wanted to match it up to the generations citizen project, which is so important. And it was a really great success. We were really, really lucky today. Really, this was wonderful. And I'm hoping to do it next year and invite all of you in to come see it.
Okay, well, job well done.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, President Felice.
Okay,
Respect.
all right. All right, thank you, Mr. Superintendent. That brings us to our trustee and advisory committee report. We'll start with Ms. Flippin. Any reports?
Nothing.
Okay. Mr. Barry?
Nothing since
Nothing? Trustee Kavanaugh, who's back feeling better? We're
I'm
happy,
feeling better,
happy
thank
to
you.
have you rejoin us.
So happy to be here.
Okay. Vice President.
Online?
What's that?
Chris and.
Oh, Chris and, okay, do they have any reports?
Nothing from Chris.
Nothing for Mr. Pacini?
Nothing for Mr. Puccini and nothing for Mr. Trent.
Okay. Vice President Hayes?
Just briefly, I did go to the Facilities and Finance meeting yesterday. I'm not on the committee, but I take advantage of going to committee meetings when I can. And our Assistant Superintendent for Business led the meeting along with our Facilities Manager. And they gave us a lot of information about work that's being done throughout the district, updates on the Energia project, and I just wanted to tell you that I appreciate how organized that meeting was, and you could let our facilities director know about that as well.
Thank you very much. We work well together, so I will let him know.
Okay, likewise, I joined in on that meeting as well, and was happy to hear that replacing equipment is something that is very beneficial to the district because it not only upgrades the equipment, but it's more efficient in its use, so use of electricity as well. And yeah, you don't realize the work that goes into monitoring the massive amount of building repairs and the equipment that's in our buildings. But the energy audit that's being done, that the superintendent spearheaded, and the work that you're doing to supplement that, and the student component that is a result of that project is also taking place simultaneously, and apparently having good results. So we're anxious to hear the final, you were in for a portion of that meeting.
So just to bring the rest of the trustees up to date, you know, the company that Environmental Systems, oh my God,
ESG.
ESG,
right.
it's the G, I might have lost. Group, thank you, sir.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
trustee Barry, that's exactly it. We met, Beth Doyle and I met with them because one of the things they promised was, you know, an educational component to all the work they're doing to, you know, make our schools greener and more efficient. So, and that is guaranteed for the next something like 18 years. So what we're looking to spearhead this spring is at Frank P. Long, an exercise where students will be able to construct a space and try to insulate it and to see how well insulated they can make it, which is based on science and little STEM activities. We're also bringing a program into the high school where high school students, ideally starting a sophomore year, because these projects will take numerous years to complete, will be intricately involved in the whole planning, the engineering, the construction. So we're looking to incorporate that activity with the club or any student that's interested, where they can actually work with the engineers and learn about the actual process and how you make sort of buildings more energy efficient and the science and technology behind it. Above and beyond that, they'll be participating in our college and career fair this year, because there's multiple sort of career paths you can take when it comes to sort of this type of work, and not all of it requires a college degree. They're also looking to host a fair themselves where they'll represent all the different professions, from their legal teams, marketing, engineers, construction, the tradespeople, which is also fantastic. So excited about that, and excited about all the work that we've been doing around the district to make chip away at the enhancements that we need.
Yeah, so again, job well done. Also, just because of the budget that's taking place right now, all of our different groups that are assisting us, the New York State School Board Association, in conjunction with the Nassau Suffolk School Board Association, the Superintendent's Association that the superintendent attends. All of those groups are coming together with our lobbying efforts and different virtual and in-person learning about the budget, understanding the budget and what's going on with the budget right now. The good news is there does seem to be bipartisan, nonpartisan support for the budget and for restoring, for example, the foundation aid, without any of the rhetoric that goes along with it at times. So we were happy to see that. I did attend the virtual Capitol Conference on Friday, and I'm in the process of viewing some other online Understanding the State Aid budget, which was offered by the Nassau Suffolk School Board Association. I'm in the middle of viewing that one. Longwood Legislative School Breakfast that the Assistant Superintendent of Business and Finance attended has also been offered virtually, so I'm in the middle of viewing that one. And today was the in-person lobby day at Albany, so we're waiting to hear from the Nassau Suffolk School Board Association on the results of the lobbying efforts there. And then I will put together a review of all of those events on the budget to supplement the work that we're doing here, to see just, how we're going to advocate for the monies that we're gonna need to advocate for our young learners. And that's what's been happening from my end of board work. That brings us up to public commentary on agenda items. Do we have any cards? No cards? All right, we'll move on to items for discussion. The budget presentation and the tax cap and reserves is what we will talk about tonight. And you're up next.
Yes.
Or again.
Back again. So this, we mentioned the tax cap a little earlier today, but today is our second budget presentation, which will review our tax cap and our revenue overview. I want to thank Mr. Gee again for collaborating with me and putting the presentation together and working on these complex math formulas that we sort of have to maneuver to get to a final sort of tax cap levy limits. Again, just to emphasize that the budgeting process is a long process. Right now, we're in our second presentation. We're well into our budgeting process that started back in November, as I discussed last week. Our next meeting, we'll be talking about our different codes, the 1,000 codes, as illustrated in the slide, followed by curriculum instruction, which will be March 6th. And then we'll do our staffing analysis March 20th, when we have more information from our buildings, especially our secondary schools, so we can have more precise sort of staffing recommendations for the upcoming school year, all of which we're hoping to sort of wrap up in April for our budget adoption. Again, one of the things that we've learned is that there is sort of a chatter that the state budget won't be submitted on April 1st, sometimes puts school districts in a bind. So we're preparing and forging ahead as if what we got in our state runs is what we're going to be operating with. And obviously, if that changes for the better, we'll welcome it, but we're going to prepare as if it's not going to change. Again, just to review the timeline, right now we're in February, so right now we're starting to look at our full-time equivalents, which are our staffing, which are due to us, and we've been discussing staffing needs with various school administrators. And also, again, the emphasis is on curriculum and supporting student achievement and what we can do to sort of enhance our programs and to better support our staff and our students in that endeavor. So let's get right to it. The essential questions first, the tax cap, what it is, what's the difference between a tax levy and a tax cap, and what role does a tax cap play in the budgeting process. We'll also talk about our revenue. What are our different funding sources? To what extent does the district control its revenue? And what is our anticipated revenue for the upcoming school year, that's 24-25, which sounds very futuristic to me. In terms of the property tax cap, again, this is something that was imposed in 2012, and which basically was based on inflation back in the day, which used to hover around 2%. The idea was to kind of cap school districts from increasing the tax levy at a disproportionate amount in order to sort of help alleviate the burden from taxpayers. So again, the idea was twofold: protect taxpayers from overtaxation, and to allow school districts to account to rising costs or inflation. Because as we know, the cost of operating a school district, as the cost of living, goes up year after year. The tax levy is basically the portion of our school budget or our revenue that is the responsibility of our taxpayers. As I said there, that definition, it pertains to school districts. It's a local property tax passed by the votes of the school district that generates revenue to fund our programs, that helps in the portions of our educational program that's not paid for by the state. As Trustee Hayes likes to put it, it's what it costs to help run the school district, or to run the school district. But the tax levy is the portion that is the taxpayer's portion. The tax levy limit is basically the limit in terms of how much, and I'm going to say it in layman's terms, we can raise a tax levy without requiring a supermajority vote. So, for example, if the tax levy limit was 3%, and we proposed a tax levy of 2.5%, that would require a simple majority vote to pass it along. Anything beyond the tax levy limit would require a supermajority. So how do we calculate this limit? So basically it's based on an 8-state formula that comes from the New York State Comptroller's Office. The first 7 steps determines the tax levy limit without any exclusions. This is what's called the base formula. It determines the initial tax levy limit. The 8th step factors in exclusions, which determines the tax levy limit with exclusions, which is pretty obvious. And so basically the use of this formula is mandated by New York State, and we're all required to do it. I want to note that the actual tax levy limit is not due to the state till March 1st, but we typically do this as one of the first steps in the budgeting process when we start looking at our revenue. Here's basically how the numbers sort of fall into all the different steps of this formula. Again, all of the components of the base formula, which is the first 7 steps, are fixed, meaning the school district has very little control on these values. Exclusions, again, which is step 8, allow school districts to elevate the tax levy above the initial tax levy to sort of account for capital expenditures. Those are improvements to buildings, transportation, and BOCES capital expenditures as well. And again, as I mentioned before, proposed budget increases within the tax levy limit requires a simple majority. Anything above and beyond the tax levy limit or the tax cap requires a super majority. So let's get into the weeds a little bit. The first 2 steps has to do with the actual taxes levied in the prior year. And again, when I say prior year, we're talking about this year, which is the first step. That was our tax levy for the 2023 to 2024 year. And you multiply that by the growth factor, which in our case is 1.0012. The growth factor is basically a measure of development in our community, which includes new construction. Some school districts that are in different types of or more affluent areas where there's a lot of big houses going up or additions to houses going up have a growth factor that's going to surpass ours. Ours is relatively low, comparatively speaking. So again, that growth factor is impacted by new construction or improvements to the taxable property within the boundaries of the tax district. So we multiply this year, and it's a little bit of a misleading because it says prior year, but the prior year is this year, by our growth factor to achieve our new tax levy. Next, we have steps 3 and steps 4. Step 3 is basically the current amount of revenue we receive from pilots for the current school year, or again, the prior school year when we talk about next year's budget. And this year, the figure is about $7.8 million. And step 4 is the value representative of the total sum of our capital levy exclusion from our current year, or the prior year reference to this year. So those numbers and that subtotal, when added to our levy from steps 1 and 2, brings up the revenue source is $70 million, a little above $70 million. Moving on to step 5, this growth factor is based upon 2% or the rate of inflation, whichever is lower. This year, the rate of inflation has been hovering around 4%, which means we have to use a 2% growth factor. If the inflation was 1.2%, we would use 2% as our growth factor as well. So basically, this sort of forces you to, I'm sorry, I misspoke. If the inflation was below 2%, we would have to use that as our growth factor. So if the inflation was at 1.3%, that would be our growth factor for this year. But because it's hovering around 4%, we're relegated to that 2% growth factor. So when you multiply that growth factor, that brings up that figure to $72 million and change. Next is basically steps 6 and 7, which again, we subtract the pilot agreements or the estimated pilot agreements from the subsequent school year, 24-25. And there's step 7 basically is you can add any carryover from the prior year, which is an amount that's really complex in terms of mathematically. Typically, school districts don't have any carryover. It's rare when you see some carryover, and for this year, our carryover is 0. So when you subtract that, it brings down the tax levy limit before the exclusions to $64 million, which takes up to step 8, which is our exclusions, which are various. The capital exclusion is the only component of the calculation impacted by internal factors that occur within a school district. So bond payments we may have, transfer to capital lines, energy performance contract, which we don't have as of yet, all affect can be used as exclusions. And basically this allows us to increase the tax levy to account for some of these expenses that we account, giving us some more wiggle room in terms of operating the school district. All said and done, when you put all these 8 steps together and you calculate the tax cap, our anticipated tax cap for the 24-25 school year is going to be 2.7%. And again, to emphasize, this does not represent what we're proposing as our tax levy for the upcoming budget vote. This is basically our tax cap. Again, one of the things we emphasized last year, we'll emphasize again, is our budget process functions independently of the tax cap. Basically, we're doing zero-based budgeting where what are our needs, how best can we afford those needs, and we try to make it work. And once we sort of put our budget together and we look at expenditures, we see where that falls in relation to the tax cap. So again, our anticipated tax cap for the upcoming school year would be 2.7%. And I want to emphasize again, that is not our proposed levy, that's just our cap. On the other side of this is our revenue. And what are our revenue sources? Well, about 49, or exactly 49% comes from our taxpayers. 39.7%, almost 40%, comes from state aid. Other revenue represents 6.5% of our revenue. And finally, we have our appropriated fund balance, which is monies left over from last year's budget that we can appropriate for use in this year's budget, which represents about 4.8%. Break that down a little further, let's first talk about our state aid, which has been in the news quite a bit as of recently. A couple of weeks ago, the governor released her initial tax budget proposal, and this is basically the numbers as it pertains to the South Country School District. What I want to emphasize is if you just look at the state aid runs, it shows a drop or a loss of $655,000 and change in state aid, but that's a little bit of a misleading because that includes an increase of our grant for our universal pre-K program. Grants are not factored into revenue, and the universal pre-K grant specifically can only be used to support our pre-K program, so it's not a revenue source. So it's important that we take that out of this proposal to get a more adequate sort of figure in terms of what the impact is in the state's proposal. That actual impact minus the universal pre-K grant is actually $1.2 million in change. So that's basically the hit that we're taking when we compare it to the state aid received from last year as compared to the state aid proposed for next year. Some of this also includes aid that's based on usage, transportation aid, which is an example that's based on how much we use. So it doesn't really represent a loss for us, even though it's in that calculation. And the loss in building aid is what we anticipated because we still have bond payments from a bond from the 15 years ago. But our building aid based on that construction is dropping. We anticipated this $542,000. So this is not a surprise. The surprise really is a drop in foundation aid, which basically is happening because there was a change in the formula. This year, the governor decided to use a 10-year average for the consumer price index, which is a little misleading because, and dropping also the lowest and highest year, which made that figure somewhat lower than it should have been. And also the reversal of the safe harmless provision, which guarantees school districts the same aid year after year. So in other words, for schools on safe harmless, or hold harmless, the guarantee from the state was that your aid would not decrease. It may not increase, but it's certainly not going to decrease. And so the governor's kind of changed course. The last time this happened was 2020, which ironically, that year, the Chiefs played the San Francisco 49ers, which is happening this year. Joe Biden ran against Donald Trump, which seems to be happening this year again. And we're talking about foundation aid as well. And this is a joke that Mr. Gee heard at the legislative breakfast. So we're looking at, a sort of decrease in aid of about $1 million when all said and done. So at this point, like I said last week, we don't panic over that. We work around it. But according to our legislators and according to superintendents or various organizations that we speak to, this is most likely going to change between now and the actual submission of the final state budget. In terms of other revenue, we have miscellaneous revenue that includes tuition, rental income, Medicaid reimbursements, etc. We also use reserves. If you look at our long-term planning, we use reserves and we replenish reserves. That's kind of the goal. And a lot of our expenditures are offset by grants that are not included in our revenue. So at the end of the year, when those grants offset our revenue, the idea is that you want to end the school year with some sort of fund balance because it allows for planning in the future, and you have to budget for contingencies or the unforeseen. So again, the note of these fund balance reserves are approximations will be adjusted during the budget process, but as it stands, we remain pretty static when it comes to the use of our reserves on a year-to-year basis, and we've been able to replenish them as we demonstrated last week's presentation. So just to sort of do a quick recap, the tax base is based on legislation from 2012. Again, the tax cap is based on that 8-point formula that I went over. The anticipated tax levy limit for South Country this year will be 2.7%. Again, this does not represent what we're going to propose as a tax levy. We have to go through our budgetary process that goes through April to determine that final number. And again, this also represents a figure that if we propose something beneath it, requires a simple majority. Anything above and beyond the tax levy limit requires a supermajority. And again, we don't factor this into our budgeting process. We're going to budget based on the needs of the district and to make sure that our school budget aligns with our priorities and our goals. And again, above and beyond taxes, we're funded by grants, state aid, pilot, and miscellaneous resources. And another thing I want to point out that people don't get, the tax levy or the increase is not a budget-to-budget comparison. It's a levy-to-levy comparison. So when we propose, let's say, an increase of 2% to our tax levy, we're not proposing a 2% increase to our entire budget, just the portion of the budget that's funded by taxpayers. And that, again, to review our budget timeline, at our next meeting on February 28th, which this year is not the last day of the month because we're in a leap year, we'll go over our 1000 code, which is general support, operation, maintenance, security, and utilities, transportation, and employee benefits, debt services, fund transfers, and capital expenditures. And that we'll do next time around. So that concludes my presentation. I open up for questions if any trustees have any questions.
Okay, start going around the table.
The only thing I would point out is you use the term taxpayer, as opposed to state aid. We should be careful with that because they are both taxpayer things. It's local property taxes versus state aid, which is just generated in a different way, but they are both.
Thank you for the clarification.
Just,
I apologize to the state.
Well, and to the taxpayers.
And to the taxpayers as well.
Make this.
That's a great emphasis. So we separate the state aid because that's what comes directly from the state, but of course, we all pay taxes to the state. Good point, trustee.
It's just the terminology.
Yes.
I struggle
Appreciate
with
that.
but, that's all.
The, on slide 16, where you talk about pilots and you show a $4 million figure, how come that's different than in your other slides where you're calculating?
The pilot's are $7.5 million.
It's the way it's laid out there, it's awkward.
Hold on.
If you look at the screen,
It shows
The-
miscellaneous revenue at $4 million. and
So
then
that
it-
miscellaneous revenue is also pilots?
No, he's
No.
pulled out, see where it says miscellaneous
yeah,
revenue
that's the
there?
$1.5 million.
Then that comes, just take out that box, and it comes over to the miscellaneous revenue. Can I,
I think
Can
trustee
I
Trent had
put
a
it back
comment
there?
also.
see miscellaneous revenue
Yeah.
here? It becomes that box of all of these
16.
things
16.
that make up the miscellaneous revenue.
But when you go back to this slide over here, 13,
I see
where
what
you
you
step
mean.
3, it says add pilots from prior year. And then step 6, less pilots from current year. One amount is $7,800,000, the other one is $7,500,000. Why are those numbers different?
So, I'll explain. The $7.5 million figure is the same. So remember, current year is next year, when you look at the budget.
Yeah.
That $7.5 million, if you go back to slide 16, sorry. It-
Slide
does it say-
13.
I'm sorry, I know, when you go back to 16, you see the $7.5 million figure is there, it's the same.
See,
Can
All
you
right, I'm
push
just-
forward on
I'm just not
16?
seeing it right now.
Yeah.
But all right, someone will
Keep
show
going.
it to me better
Keep
later.
going. That, nope, go back, right there, is what she's talking about, where it says.
Oh, no, so, I'm sorry, so that's just reserves. That, I
That's
captured
what
But
the,
it says revenue, why is it, well, it says revenue. It should say reserves?
no, it's use of reserves. I'm not sure what you mean.
Oh, okay, this
She's
is other
following
revenue,
it where
so
it
this
says
is how it
pilots,
So-
and it says 4 million straight across from
Oh,
it,
no,
like it's
so,
pulled out.
I see what you're saying.
I know what she's
So,
asking.
no, so basically, I highlighted
Yeah.
the lines that had the reserves.
Yeah, Cheryl, that's how the table looks without that,
Yeah, if you look up at the screen,
at the
Cheryl,
screen, Cheryl. That's how it looks without the,
so when I
those lines
highlight
popped forward.
reserves, I pop up the reserves. I included the appropriated fund balance, which is an error,
Yeah.
but that's the use of the reserves.
So where do I see that slide without that highlight?
I can produce it for you. When you print out the presentation, it doesn't allow
It
you to
has
print
it
it
on
out
it.
without the animations.
So our
So
one on
that is
our,
a slide just animated?
Yes. If you look up at the screen, I'll do it again, see, that's a slide.
Go
and
ahead.
then Animate it. Similar as to what I did here, hold on, I'll go back. So I was emphasizing each of these steps.
Right.
So I just emphasize it and I bring it up.
Yeah, I see that, you did that in the other slides,
Right.
that you showed it the full version and then animated, but not on that slide. You didn't give us, okay.
wait, no,
all right, I
this
see.
is just a PDF of the page, so this is the final
Got it.
thing for it, that's why it's
Sorry for the confusion.
wonky looking when you look.
Sorry
at
about
the
that,
page.
President Felice.
Okay.
And I think, I don't know if trustee Trent has. a question?
He does.
I think he just wanted to know what slide you were on,
Yeah.
and he understands.
Okay. Okay. So based on all of this, you said, we anticipated the transportation, well, the transportation is based on usage.
Correct,
So we didn't really lose money, we're being reimbursed for what we used.
correct,
Okay. So it's like flat.
correct.
Okay. So with respect to this, what was it, 500? Oh no, that was the pre-K money, the $655,000. That's really the money we
No,
lost, per se?
no, so let me go back to that slide. Oops, sorry, went the wrong way.
Is that gonna be slide 15?
State aid slide. There it is. I went too fast. Here it is. So really the number is $1.2 million, even though that includes the transportation aid, because the $655,000 figure includes the pre-K grant. That's not factored into our revenue, it's not factored into our budget. That's all grant-based. So it's a little
That
misleading
can only be
when,
used on pre-K.
Mhm.
That money can only be used on pre-K?
Correct, and it's a grant, so it's not, just like our title grants they don't go in our revenue side.
Okay.
They're used to offset expenses.
So did we get more money than we anticipated for pre-K?
School districts always get more money than they anticipate in the pre-K line,
Okay.
you know, from,
So with respect to pre-K, we only have so many seats for pre-K.
correct.
Were we given too much money? Can we utilize the money that we were given?
No, you
Well,
can
what do
only
we
use
have,
it for
90
your current,
seats?
it's all based on enrollment, so you can only use it for your current program. Some districts receive these grants or allocations for the grant and use zero funds from it because they don't have pre-K programs.
So what do they do with the money?
You can't do anything with the money.
It just sits?
No, you don't
They
receive
give
it.
it back?
This is a
Oh, they don't
proposed
get it.
budget. You only get what you use.
Okay.
Yeah, so, you know,
So if we don't use it, we don't get it?
correct. Yeah, it's a very specific grant for pre-K.
Got it.
From
Okay,
the
so
state.
that was that question. And we have what, 90 seats? In
No, we
pre-K?
have 90 in the full day and then 2 half-days, about 120.
Okay. Okay. And, so we don't have a nurse right now at pre-K. Can we use the pre-K money for the nurse?
Not for nurse.
Not for the
No,
nurse?
come from our expense, correct.
That we would have to expense that, okay. And what about security?
That's our expense. We
That's our
budget that.
expense too. Custodial?
YMCA provides custodian.
Snow removal?
Bunch of kids.
That would be us.
That does too. Okay. Okay, so out of what we lost so far, and understand we're still in the process of advocating for more money, advocating for restoration of foundation aid, as every other school district is. Where do you see us making up the revenue loss?
I couldn't answer that today. It's like, we have to go
You're
through the
still
whole.
looking.
Yeah, the budget process goes through April, so, you know, it's a line by line analysis of our expenditures to see where we could sort of cut. And again, you gotta remember that cutting a budget.
If you had to cut,
If I have to, right,
because we still have healthy reserves.
correct,
And so
So-
we haven't even looked at that yet.
not yet.
Okay.
So we have to really look, and again, it's about efficient budgeting. So
By the way, I'm
so-
looking at you and I'm watching Jen's head nod up and down.
Am I doing pretty good?
Yes,
Mr.
we're
Gay?
we're in agreement.
No, so, you know, you gotta remember, using reserves is kind of, we like to do it when we can replenish it, so it really is a last resort.
Yeah, and we don't wanna look at reserves as, you know, using them for everyday expense, we understand that. But over time, we built up reserves for a rainy day.
That's exactly right.
That, you know,
So-
and we've been very prudent about not using reserves for everyday expenses.
Our reserve balances have increased pretty steadily, so the only difference is, you know, we had 2 capital reserve votes. So obviously our capital reserve, those balances are gonna decline, but that's because we're doing the work in the buildings and we're gonna be receiving building aid for that work. So,
Right, we do the work so that we receive more aid,
right.
so we can do more work.
Right, but there may be years, you know, when I think about, off the top of my head, 2027, 2028, where we may have to use more reserves than we can replenish. And that's kind of the idea. And if you recall from last week, I think of our 5 reserves, 3 are fully funded, 2 still have some room for growth, which means we're in a pretty good place. So if we have to use the reserves a little bit more, and that's the idea, the balances do fluctuate during time, you try to keep them steady. And there's a lot of chatter about reserves, you know, you know, school districts need to operate with some fund balance, you know, that's a typical business practice. We're capped at a certain amount, and that's a big sort of lament from school districts, but we're in a good position to mitigate some of these challenges.
And one of the other conversations that took place at the Finance and Facilities meeting last night too, is they're going around, to, you know, classroom by classroom or office by office. And as they see there's a need for upgrading and refurbishing, they're doing that. You know, because, you know, you have, you know, started Clipper Pride.
Right.
And Clipper Pride means a lot of things. And certainly building appearance and, you know, the work that you did here in central office, you know, you want people to have pride in our buildings and coming to work, students coming to their facilities. One of the other projects that I know is near and dear to your heart is the refurbishing of the auditorium at the high school.
Right.
That's still on your list, and we haven't gotten there yet.
We'll get there. And again, the little enhancements to the district office were very low cost. It's using materials we had on hand and our staff that we have on hand. But again, you have to feel proud of your environment. And, I think when you talk about equipment and what we talked about is, for a long time, we've been sort of refurbishing, repairing equipment and sometimes it's actually less expensive to replace. And so we've changed that practice. This includes some equipment in some of our kitchens, some HVAC units, although we're gonna get a whole revamping to our energy performance contract. But yeah, little enhancements because, we need to have high standards, not just in terms of our facilities, but even in student achievement. And there's a lot of work to be done there as well. So when we look at our budget and we look at places where we can cut, we certainly want to make sure that we still support learning, we still support student achievement. We have a lot of room for growth. As proud as I am of this district, and I love this district, there's a lot of work ahead of us. And that's something that I think we all appreciate and we discuss. So I can't, or we can't, or the team can't sort of be dismayed by this drop in foundation aid. We press forward and we meet the challenge. One of the things that works in our favor, as you mentioned, is the fact that we have healthy reserves. I'm not saying that we're going to be using reserves disproportionately, but I'm confident that we'll be able to meet the challenges. And we're going to continue to support programs. We have not cut programs. In fact, last year we added $5 million worth of programs and resources to the school district. We continue sort of enhancing our instructional programs. We just have to be very smart about how we do it.
And with respect to programs and curriculum and performance, we always know that we want to do better. Even, it doesn't matter how high performance, we are or could be, there's always room for growth. So we have, curriculum isn't coming up until what, the end of March?
Correct.
Okay. So when we talk about curriculum, can you also talk about achievement and growth and what we can do to do better
Sure.
for that presentation?
Work with Beth Doyle and we'll put something together for sure.
Yeah, because, the assistant superintendents do a lot of work, behind the
Yes.
scenes that we and the community doesn't know about, and certainly we want to highlight the work that they do, because it's a team effort
Correct.
to
And
get it
again,
done.
sometimes when you get on lists and you don't rank high, what does that say about our kids, our community, our teachers? And that's, I think, what I take exception to. It doesn't really reflect the work we're doing. It also doesn't reflect the fact that there is a need to improve and to really focus on our achievement gaps, to make sure all of our kids, no matter where you live in our community, is performing at a standard we're gonna be satisfied with. And I don't know that I'll ever be satisfied unless, 100% of our kids are proficient in graduating. But, the race to excellence has no finish line. You keep chopping away at it, and you need to make incremental progress. So, I get caught between those two sort of mindsets, and one, I love this community, and I think we do great things, and we do great work. But two, we have a lot of room for growth, and I'll say it publicly, we do. And it doesn't take away any of my Clipper pride, but it just kind of inspires us to work harder. And we have a lot, and again, it's I love a challenge, and nothing is more rewarding than meeting a challenge. So when we reflect back years from now, because progress is slow and steady, nothing changes overnight. But I do anticipate that day when we can look back and reflect on where we were and where we're at. And even when we get to that point, I'm still going to feel like we have room for growth.
Okay. All right, thank you.
May I-
Anybody else?
I have
Yes, Ann.
a couple of comments. This is the time of year when I look at these figures and get very anxious. Are we gonna have the money we need to run the district? And every year I'm told, just wait till the next presentations come in. And what I've learned over the last 5 years is our initial reaction and calculation may not be the same as when we get to the end, but it's very hard to wait for that information. So please be aware that some of your trustees just want to be reassured at every presentation that there is the money to continue to operate the programs that we've got.
So, to that point, as soon as those state aid runs came, I rushed into Mr. Gee's office with a look of panic, as he said, we're good.
Okay,
We're gonna be able to afford to operate the district. We don't anticipate having to make any cuts. if anything, we want to try to find ways to still grow our programs. So, but no, I can say with certainty that we'll have enough money to operate the district.
So with regard to the state aid runs, I was actually interested and glad that you did a separate slide about how to interpret what the state aid runs mean, even though that technically is not part of the budget process. It's just an understanding of
Right.
what money we can expect from the state that would be part of our budget. So thank you for doing that. I thank Trustee Barry for making it absolutely clear that what we're talking about is state money that helps us and local money that helps us. And our local money that has, not just like local grants and things like from the South Country Education Foundation, but our real property taxes, the portion of the taxes that we pay that we pay every year, and also the pilots. So those local monies, together with the state money, is what gives us the total amount of what we need to operate.
Right. And so we have to make sure that, when we produce a balanced budget, that our expenditures are covered by our revenue. The other thing that happens is expenditures are offset by grants, and that's how hopefully you end up with like fund balances.
Right.
Again, it's not that we over budget to have extra money at the end of the year, but you have to budget to allow for contingencies or anything that may happen during the course of the year.
And I wanted to thank President Felice for her comment, which I wanted to elaborate on just a little bit about the organizations that we have available to us to do the lobbying, that as individual boards, we can make our best efforts talking to local legislators, but by having the actual lobbyist in place, both New York State School Boards Association, the Superintendent's Association, and others, there's a professional presence there. And we've had input, because every year when the New York State School Boards Association wants to know what they ought to be concentrating on our behalf, we have input into the resolutions that they give us, and we can determine what aspects we want to have promoted by them on our behalf. And this year, there seems to be unanimity with regard to this hold harmless issue, for example. And that, it's good to see that. And it's good to see that the word has gotten out that by not continuing the hold harmless, it's causing difficulty for school districts like ours, because we've been in a hold harmless position.
I mean, there's advocacy in many different areas, and so we, even in my organization, which is New York State Council of School Superintendents, we have a legislative sort of committee that advocates on our behalf, and we communicate to them, which kind of saves us, or gives us the ability to focus on teaching and learning in our school districts when we have people who are dedicated to do the advocacy on our behalf. Along with NYSBA, NYSET. This is the first year I've seen so much, to your point, sort of collaboration, which is nice.
Well, yeah, we spoke about it briefly last meeting, and to continue on what Ann was saying, now the unions are coming together to collaborate
Right.
with our legislative branches, because we're all in this together.
One island, one voice. It's kind of the
Yes,
mantra.
yes.
Yeah, and again, these cuts disproportionately affect suburban school districts, especially on Long Island, and some upstate as well.
Anybody else? Okay. How about check with Mr. Pacini and Mr.
Mr.
Trent?
Pacini, do you have anything? No? Mr. Trent?
No, I don't have anything.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, so just review the last slide, the timeline again, if you would, please.
So our next presentation is the budget codes 1,000, 5,000, 9,000, which are kind of self-explanatory. Then March 6th, we have a curriculum and instruction, those lines, which goes everything from salaries to supplies. And then March, based on that, we look at our staffing analysis. And the reason the staffing analysis comes in late March is because at the secondary schools, our we do individualized scheduling at the secondary schools, especially the high school. It's all contingent on student requests and course requests.
And that's the last slide, right? Yes. Okay. All right, thank you.
Great, thank you, President Felice. Back to
All righty. I'd like for you to come back. In the interest of time, I'm just going to omnibus the remaining resolutions. In other words, I'm going to take them all at once. Okay? So we are going to ask you for your recommendation
Yep.
to approve items G, H, and I all together.
Yep.
All right?
The administration recommends the approval of curriculum items G1 through G5, personnel changes reflected in schedules H1 through H5, and business items reflected in schedules I1 through I7.
Okay. So G1 through G5, H1 through H5, and I1,
G1 through 4, right?
what, I'm sorry?
G1 through 4.
I'm sorry, you're correct. I'll start again.
All right, because that was at the end. G1 through 4, H1 through 5, and I1 through 7. Need a motion and a second, please?
I'll make a motion to that.
Thank you, Trustee Barry, seconded by Vice President Hayes. Any discussion on any of those items?
Can I just showcase one of those items?
Absolutely.
Which is the South Country Education Foundation Winter Grants.
Yes.
And I'm hoping that our website or your report or something, you can highlight all of the terrific
Sure.
things that are being provided there.
Well, why don't we
Provided-
approve, why don't we
yeah,
approve it
correct.
first, and then he can highlight
Correct.
any of the items that are there, because I'm sure he's gonna wanna highlight some
Yes.
of them. Okay. All right, so we have a motion and a second to approve. All those in favor, please raise your hands. All those present have raised their hands in affirmative, as well as our remote. So the motion passed unanimously. And now for the superintendent's report on what we just approved.
Yeah, I just want to give special thanks to Stop and Shop. They made a donation to our food pantry, a couple donations from Donors Choose. But especially want to thank the South Country Education Foundation for the granting of their winter grants. At our next board meeting, I'll prepare a slide capturing all of those, what those grants are sort of funding for, and typically they're great experiences for our students. Always appreciative of the South Country Education Foundation, and I'm going to prepare a formal recognition for our next board meeting.
I just wanted to do kudos to the Stop and Shop, as a former employee of mine is the one who did that.
nice.
So it's good to see her name involved with good work in our district.
And I see we also have a donation from Donors Choose
Yep.
for the classroom of Mrs. Napolitano. Classroom for, is that a bug?
Is it? There is a difference
They
between
will
insects and
determine.
bugs. I was a science guy.
And is that it? Is there anything else you want to highlight from those? I think that covers it, right? Okay. All right. Oh, actually, we approved our Bellport Middle School South Country Singers to compete up in Troy, New York.
Yes, they'll be going up during February break. They're participating in a high school a cappella competition, even though they're middle school kids. So I wish them well. I got to see them perform at the middle school at a pasta fundraiser. They're fantastic,
Great.
but I'm biased.
They were good. They were very good. All right, that brings us to public commentary for any agenda item or non-agenda item. Do we have any cards? No cards? Do you have a card? Step right up. You can stay right there.
Hi, good evening, Corinne Moticon. I had emailed the board last week after our last budget long-term planning exercise with questions about whether our projections of state aid included the known cuts to building aid that we know about, like something like $3-something million over the next few years. I never got a response to that question, and like 7 days later, I'm here listening, and I see the same 2024 budget, is $2 million less than it was in projected state aid than what it was presented last year in our long-term planning. And I wanted to make the point that, you know, the district 2 years ago had a kind of disaster in its long-term planning. And at least in that disaster, there was, you know, the assumptions were open. And since then, every year, I feel like as the public, we get less and less information from the district as to what goes into those long-term planning exercises. And I get it, it's an estimate. But like all estimates, you know, what goes into it is actually the important part of the heuristic model and the practice of long-term budgeting. And so I just want to point out, in 7 days, things changed a lot, and it's not just the governor's budget that changed that. And I think the more information we have as a crew, we can work together to make sure that we're providing the best education for our kids, because they need it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, closing remarks by board members. Any closing remarks? Okay. Check with our
Closing
two
remarks,
fellows.
Mr. Trent, or Mr. Pacini?
Nothing from me, I have
Okay.
nothing to add to that.
Nothing for either.
Okay,
Thank you.
All right, with that, I'll take a motion to adjourn. Motion by trustee Barry, seconded by trustee Flippin. All those in favor, raise your hands. We stand adjourned.